whole new level of flavor. KFC, it's finger-licking good. The new crispy barbecue zinger from KFC. Get ready for a whole new level of flavor. KFC, it's finger-licking good. The time by KFC is
1 o'clock.
Well, this is Rory Stone, Lord Field Marshal, part of a place we then call Kings of Jamaica, saying, and right now, you know, say in tune to the bridge, 99 FM from yard to abroad. Right.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans, by justice. The people's champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica the North. Right to life, right to liberty. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, the people demand. Right to life and security. Oh, what a job.
Happy Tuesday. Today is July 4th, the 4th day of my birthday month. But it's not about me, it's about Jamaicans for Justice and the human rights of all citizens. Thank you so much for joining us and keeping in tune with us here at JFJ and our Let's Start Justice program. Of course, as is customary, you can call us in at 676-4996 or send us a WhatsApp at 239-7583. My name is Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ.
And I'm Jade Williams, the Policy and Advocacy Specialist at JFJ.
Now, it's a beautiful month. As a parent, you're happy that you no longer have to wake up early in the morning. So for those parents who are also feeling that joy, you would recognize that I'm also in a good spirit here this Tuesday. No traffic this morning. And again, starting yesterday, I could actually be in my bed up to a particular point.
Wow.
So my spirit is uplifted.
I'm happy
and
to
I'm
hear.
happy. quite happy. So we have that going on until what? September thereabout. But yes.
Well, I have that baseline happiness all year.
Oh, Lordy. But again, thanks again. No, just to get into the program for today, and unfortunately, the happy spirit is not one that we're going to be carrying forward in some aspects of what we're going to be discussing, but there are still things to celebrate, certainly. Yesterday, July 3, the Sexual Harassment Act came into effect. Mm-hmm. We would have made that note that the Minister of Gender, Minister Olivia Babsy-Grange, had set the commencement date. And we're going to be having that on the discussion, but it is certainly worth repeating at several points. Sexual harassment in effect, and though it's within institutional settings, Jade and listeners, I do hope that it will start changing some of the cultural norms with the catcalling, and that's decent terminology for what women tend to go through when we're walking in the streets, yes?
Yes, absolutely.
Another significant development that happened last week, and we're going to be having some further discussions on it in the second half of the program, is that after almost 2 decades of advocacy, the Section 24 of the Child Care and Protection Act, which allowed a court to imprison a child, place that child in a juvenile detention facility on the basis of that child being deemed uncontrollable, beyond parental control, the government has sent a signal that that particular provision will be repealed in the law. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly a step in the right direction. We also saw where the government announced last week that we're going to be seeing the opening of 2 therapeutic centers. One in Kingston, which is a non-residential one, and the other in St. Anne, which is a refurbished facility. It was formerly the Windsor's Girls' Home. I used to volunteer there as a teen, mm-hmm. and it's now a residential facility. I think we were told that it was changed to only facilitate boys, yes. But it's now one that will house those children who are deemed to be in need of care and protection. Now, while we have this good proposal and amendment being put forward by the government there are still some areas of concern. And again, we're going to be delving into that in the second half of the program. But it's one of those things wherein, what's the language that the grandmothers will say? You swap black what for what's that old Jamaican proverb?
I'm much too young to be able to give you that one.
Right. I won't disclose the age. I don't think you're that young.
I'm much
But
too
the
young.
point that we're making is that you're asking for uncontrollable child to be removed from the law. The concern that civil society organizations have raised, replace it with what? Behavioral challenges, much too broad, quite a number of problems we have with it. The matter is going to be up for debate in the House of Parliament today. The concern that we have, that it seems that it's not just for debate. It seems as if the government is hoping to pass this particular bill today. And again, we're going to be talking about the implications of the proposals that Minister Favour Williams would have put forward in the House last week, and what that really means. Are we simply substituting one problem for another with the same result, where there's a possibility of a child who is deemed to have behavioral challenges being incarcerated? And if it still doesn't extend to incarceration, as was before, we're still seeing that sense that a child with behavioral challenges can be institutionalized within state care for an extended period.
You know, Michael, I want to just clarify for the listeners that when we say behavioral challenges, I don't want you to think about what you would colloquially think about as a behavioral challenge. The list is so extensive and would consider so many things that are ordinary behaviors that you might have a child being incarcerated, possibly for their ordinary childish behavior. Right? So it is something that we will discuss further in the show.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on.
Yes, so we'll talk about our right of the day for today, which is the right to security of the person. It's normally forms a part of our right to life and liberty, so that's usually the last leg, security of the person. But security of the person has a specific meaning, and it refers to the protection from suffering bodily or mental injury by the state or by private actors, regardless of whether the victim is detained or not. So that is the right that protects you from harm outside of fatal harm. And we also have our trivia question for today, which is in line with our topic. On what date was the Sexual Harassment Act gazetted? So we have the commencement date, which was yesterday. So on what date was it gazetted? And if you are a fan of the show and you listened to some of our earlier episodes, it would have been discussed in an earlier episode. So hopefully we can see a great response for that. So you can respond to that through our social media pages, or you can send us a WhatsApp at 2397583.
Okay, so again, exciting day today because we now have a Sexual Harassment Act that is in effect. Yes. So kudos to our Minister of Gender and Affairs as well as the Bureau of Gender Affairs, who would have been championing this particular piece of legislation. And we're going to be joined by Mr. David One, who is the president of the Jamaica Employers Federation, also joined by Miss Bridget Steele, who is the board secretary of the Small Business Association, and special welcome to Mrs. Sharon Robinson, who is the principal director of the Bureau of Gender Affairs. But before we get into the discussion, just to indicate that the Sexual Harassment Protection and Prevention Act, it took effect yesterday, July 3, 2023, and the Act defines sexual harassment as the making of unwelcome sexual advances towards a person, quite gender neutral as you're hearing, yes, by another person, which is regarded as offensive or humiliating by that person towards whom the sexual advance is being made. Sexual harassment has the effect of interfering with their work performance or creating an intimidating, offensive, or hostile work environment. The Act will also apply in the workplace, schools, correctional institutions, places of safety, nursing homes, medical and psychiatric facilities, among other institutional settings. Yes. But before we get into it, just for clarity, it does not extend to street-based harassment.
Absolutely. Now, on the announcement of this commencement date, the Minister of Culture and Gender, Olivia Grange, would have indicated that the ministry has been undergoing the necessary preparation for the commencement, sensitizing key stakeholders, companies, and hiring the necessary staff, such as the investigators that will be necessary to look into complaints.
Setting things right, this Honourable House passed legislation against sexual harassment, and we continue to sensitize employees, employers, tenants, landlords, and others ahead of the implementation of the law. At the same time, we have been working to put mechanisms in place to investigate and adjudicate complaints of sexual harassment. This has included the recruitment of investigators and the appointment of the panel to hear each case. We have already hired 4 sexual harassment investigators, a senior investigator and 3 other persons to support her. And we have also done several sensitization sessions with companies across Jamaica.
That was Minister Olivia Babs-Grange, our Minister of Gender. Again, we're happy with this development. But the question that we're asking, with the Act now in force, what exactly should businesses and associations need to do to ensure that they're compliant? And what are the consequences of non-compliance? And again, acknowledging that many Jamaicans are informal workers, quite a significant percentage of our population, what protections are available to them, particularly those who are likely to have challenges with internal structures. For example, some of us who may have daycare workers or day workers rather, what exactly should those day workers, what we call helpers, how exactly should they get some sort of redress from the Bureau? So again, good news, but many questions to be answered. We're joined by Sharon Coburn Robinson, who is the Principal Director of the Bureau of Gender Affairs, Mr. David Wan, President of the Jamaica Employers Federation, as well as Ms. Bridget Steele, Board Secretary of the Small Business Association. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We have our guest on. All right, let's go to the break, and then when we return, we just pick up with our guest and get straight into the discussions.
Over 14,000 Jamaicans are living with HIV and not yet on treatment. We want you to know you can live a normal life with HIV. Now is the time to get on treatment. Now is the time to start taking your medication on time, every time. Now is the time for your HIV status to become undetectable. Come to Jamaica AIDS Support for Life. We will help you to reach viral suppression. Now is the time to achieve all your goals and live a long and healthy life. To get on treatment, contact Jamaica AIDS Support for Life at 876-925-0021. A message from Jamaica AIDS Support for Life and the kind support of USAID from the American people.
If you're in business, get on the bridge. 876-669-5000. If you're in business, get on the bridge. 876-669-5000. If you're in business, get on the bridge. 876-669-5000. Call now.
Last year, Reggae Sumfest was on fire as a host of top-flight Jamaican artists turned out for an unforgettable musical tribute to iconic dancehall producer and prolific hitmaker Dave Kelly. This year, it will be magnificent as leading Jamaican entertainers across generations will come together to honor one of the most influential figures in modern popular music, producer and sound system operator extraordinaire, Lloyd James, the man we have come to know as King Jammy. Yes, it's tribute to the King. Reggae Sumfest 2023, Catherine Hall, Montego Bay, Jamaica, July 16 to 22. You can't miss this. Sponsored by H&L Rapid True Value Flow, Iberostar, JTV, Secrets, Red Stripe, Grace, Magnum, TVJ, and H&L Agro. King Jammy,
sweeter, stronger, better.
It's Jamaican, it's Caribbean, to the world on the Bridge 99 FM. You heard?
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are discussing today the implications and the considerations that we should having put in force yesterday, the sexual harassment legislation. So I believe that we're joined by Mr. David Wan, Miss Bridget Steele.
I'm here.
Hi.
Yes, I'm here.
Good afternoon and welcome to the JFJ program. We still haven't reconnected with Mrs. Sharon Coburn? No?
Okay.
All right, let's get into it. Mr. Wan, we'll start with you. From your perspective, what are you expecting to happen now that July 3 is here? Commencement of the Act is here. What do you expect and what provisions are being in place by the Jamaica Employers Federation with its members?
Yeah, well, there's been a significant notice period from over a year ago.
Yes.
We've had this notice that it's going to be turned on, at certain dates. So what we've been doing, we've been helping our members to understand the legislation, to understand how to be in compliance with the legislation. Mm-hmm. We've had several fora to talk about what's exactly inside the bill. And we've been helping them in that way. We've helped them to develop policies that they can put in a conspicuous place in the workplace so that there can be no doubt that employees know what the policy is on sexual harassment for that employer.
And just to clarify, how many members do you have at Jeff?
We have approximately 320, and that consists of some individuals and a range of small, medium, and large businesses. Okay. Now, many of the large businesses will have their own many resources available to help them, get ready for it. So the ones who we tend to help more are the medium and small enterprises because they would have less resources to deal with, the transition to the new environment.
Great. And we now have Mrs. Coburn on the call. But before we get to Mrs. Coburn, Ms. Steele, from your perspective at the Small Business Association, how prepared are you based on the commencement date now being in effect as at yesterday?
Well, here at SBJ, we have to now ramp up our situation as it relates to our members and put in policy in terms of the SBJ documented policy, which can be put on website and that kind of information. We will certainly be having discussions with our members as it relates to this policy and asking them how they can better impart the information to their workplaces. As you know, we are a group of MSMEs, and within our membership of maybe about 400 individuals, companies, and all of that, we will have to find some way of getting information out to every single individual in terms of putting this in place. But certainly from the SBJ's point of view, we need to have a standard policy which should be in writing at the association and should be on our website as well.
Okay, thank you so much. I wanted to ask Ms. Colburn now, because we're talking about the businesses preparing. So what are some of the considerations that these businesses will have to have? What are some of the major provisions in the Act that will affect compliance?
Thank you so much, Jade. So I wanted to say here very quickly that in terms of the commencement date, it is not that all workspaces are required to have their policy statement or their policy in place today or as at yesterday.
Okay.
What the commencement date signals is that persons are now aware that it is official that this is coming. And we have 1 year starting yesterday that takes you to 2024 that you can get your act together. So some persons already started preparing because they knew from 2021 when it was approved that this was coming. And then the following year, that's last April, the minister announced that persons should start doing their preparation. And so we were asked to fast track the sensitization and awareness raising in the spaces. Some persons had already developed their policy. For those who did not have one, then they reached out to us to say they wanted to do this. So as at yesterday, all workspaces are not required to have everything in place. That's not impossible. It's a call to say we now have this in place. It is official. So as at yesterday, July 3, you have 1 year to put everything in place.
Okay, so
there's no need for panic.
I get you. So we're at the beginning of our transitionary period then, in terms of compliance. So I wanted to ask, if you are an employee of one of these companies who is still transitioning, do you have access to any redress in this transitionary period?
So based on what the minister explained, we were on Nationwide yesterday, and that's a question that was asked. And I suspect persons would be asking as well. What happens now that it is put in terms of the operation date? The date of operation is July 3. If a case comes up, somebody wants to bring a case forward, then we would have to make provision to have that case heard. As you heard the minister mention, she has not yet named the tribunal, the members of the tribunal, but we have a list. We have done a short list, and we pretty much know who it is that will be placed on that tribunal. That tribunal is that body that will listen to the cases that are brought forward. And based on the fact that it's a heavily legal sort of oriented space, it's really it's broken out in terms of how the space should be. You have attorneys, 4 attorneys who are practicing attorneys and perhaps would have been experienced at least 10 years. Another 4 persons trained and certified mediators who have practiced for at least 2 years. Then we have for the other members, because that's 8, and you have the remainder, that's 6. That could be taken from persons who have experience in another group of areas. For example, labor relations, gender affairs, trade union persons who are psychiatrists or have experience in that. Perhaps you have experience in counseling, you are a counseling psychologist. And of course, because there's a piece that speaks to the tenant-landlord situation, we also have a person who is very, very apprised of how to treat with relations between landlord and tenant. So the composition is so designed to match based on how it is broken out in terms of the section 4, part 4 in the act itself, which addresses how we situate persons on the tribunal so that they are going to be able to have the kind of reach that is required. So if I were a worker and I am harassed by somebody in that space, whether it's the person in charge, a subordinate, somebody who is of equal rank, or somebody who is of low rank, then I can bring that complaint. And that can go, if you are in a workspace, to your HR, if you have an HR department. The HR department has 2 days within which to advise the person who carried out the action, that act of harassment, to advise the person that this has been brought forward. And after that 2 days has passed and the person has been advised, then HR has 14 days within which to launch an investigation and take the necessary action so that at the end of the 14 days, the person who has been aggrieved, who has brought the case forward, as well as a person who has committed that act of sexual harassment should be contacted and whatever procedures done to ensure that they can bring redress if possible. If it can be solved internally, then they can solve it internally. If it is that it can't be solved internally and they have exhausted all internal matters and procedures, because they could have a grievance procedure in place and they could use that. If that doesn't work and they have tried everything, then it can be accelerated to the tribunal directly, or it can be sent to the Bureau of Gender Affairs, where we have a unit, a sexual harassment unit that has one senior sexual harassment investigative officer and 3 sexual harassment investigative officers. Those, the 4 members of that team are trained to take the reports in a non-discriminatory manner. And those reports will be fed to the tribunal. The tribunal, having received the report, will take it from there and do what is required. So if I were a worker, the steps would be, first of all, if I have an HR department, accelerate that or send that information forward, either verbally or preferably in writing, and list all of the facts, all of the details, when it happened, where it happened, if it's more than once, all the occasions, as much as the memory can allow. If there are persons who witnessed it and they are fine with being named, they could be affidavits as well, you could put them in, and you put as much detail in as possible and allow the HR to take it from there. If you are in a situation where you have no HR,
yes,
then you definitely could send it through the Bureau for the officers to take that report, and that goes to the tribunal. If you are so agreed and you do not wish to wait on a report to be taken by an investigative officer, then it can be sent to the tribunal through the ministry. But I would have to go directly to the ministry.
Okay. So that's a pretty extensive process. But essentially, when you are an informal worker, then where there are no internal mechanisms like HR or a specific officer for this, then your likely remedy would be through the ministry or through the Bureau of Gender Affairs.
That's right, Jade.
Okay, great. So,
I'm not sure. Miss Steele, rather, from the Small Business Association,
yes.
I know because you have small and medium-sized enterprises, you perhaps won't in all of the establishments have that type of structure that Mrs. Robinson had highlighted earlier in terms of a HR unit and so on. So from where you sit, what are some of the internal procedures that have been established within the companies?
I am not able to tell you what most of these companies have in their establishment, because although we are a lobby group for the Small Business Association, we are not absolutely privy to their internal runnings or what happens in their internal organization. As it relates to the policy now, we are proposing to assist with guidelines in terms of how they should operate. But as you might be aware, some of these persons are maybe a one-man show operating out of their homes, or some operating out of their cars and all of that. So it's a situation where we might not be able to see or know what their policy is. We can only look at from our perspective, in keeping with the law, a broad-based situation and guideline as to how they should operate. You know?
Okay, so for example, I think I heard Mrs. Robinson on another program indicating that where there is no HR unit, and Mrs. Robinson, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, then it would be the person responsible, for example, the head of the organization or any other such similar post in the organization, for example, an administrative manager or so on. What would be your recommendation for clarification?
That's for me.
Mrs. Robinson.
Okay, great. So yes, that's correct. What you just outlined is correct, Mikkel. In terms of the steps, the idea is you should have somebody that you need to complain to. But if you don't, then it means that you would have to send that forward, because the idea is no one should be facing sexual harassment, and we have a zero tolerance. The government of Jamaica has a zero tolerance approach to all forms of violence and all forms of sexual harassment. And the legislation is very clear on that, zero tolerance. Yes. And so once you are in a situation where you are facing sexual harassment, you have that responsibility and that right to accelerate that so that you can get the form of redress that is required. The idea is that all of us have respect for and should have respect for personhood, property, and possessions.
We have to take the break now. Hold that thought, Mrs. Robinson. We have to take the break. But when we return, I wanted to pick up with Mr. One to find out what the Jeff is advising its members to do when it comes to advising clients and customers on what entails now in terms of their responsibility accordingly. So we'll take the break and then we'll pick up with the discussion.
The new crispy barbecue zinger from KFC. Get ready for a whole new level of flavor. KFC, it's finger licking good. The time by KFC is
29 minutes heading up to 2 o'clock.
I put it down on the wrong one.
Caribbean Airlines presents Reggae Sumfest Street Dance on Monday, July 17 at the Old Hospital Park, Montego Bay. We are killing them with style and pattern in a dancehall fashion from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. with a performance by Iwata. Yeah. Enjoy music by DJ Banga and Poppy from Della Soul Sound, Johnny Cool, Dexter Pepper, and Crazy Chris. Admission is free. Sponsored by H&L Rapid True Value, H&L Agro, Glow, Iberostar, Secrets, GTB, UDC, and many more.
Hi, I'm Barry Williams, a classically trained baritone, inviting you to an evening with the classics, featuring myself along with renowned soprano Laurie Burnett and other students of classical music. Join me at the UH Chapel Mona on Sunday, July 30th at 6 p.m. for a classical masterpiece you won't forget. Admission $3,000. Tickets available at the Music Mart and Fontana Pharmacies, Barbican and Waterloo. Barry Williams in classical concert. See you there.
KFC, take it up a notch with the new zinger. It's got the taste and the flavor, irresistible. Zinger so deliciously, it's on a new level. Crispy barbecue zinger, love the onion, crispy with the cheddar.
The new crispy barbecue zinger. Delicious Kentucky fried chicken, bacon, cheddar cheese, crispy onions with smoky barbecue sauce in a brioche bun. Available for a limited time. The new crispy barbecue zinger. Get ready for a whole new level of flavor. KFC, it's finger licking good.
No borders, no boundaries, just the sound of good music.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are having quite a bit of engaging dialogue around the Sexual Harassment Act, which came into effect yesterday, July 3. Now, just picking up with Mr. David One, the president of Jamaica Employers Federation, one of the requirements in the law is that sexual harassment is not only a protection mechanism for employees, but also customers, clients. What are some of the recommendations coming from Jeff to its members regarding ensuring that clients are so aware of the policies that exist in the companies?
You're focusing on the clients of our members now, is that your question?
And what guidelines you may have provided to them in that regard?
All right. What we've been telling our members is exactly what's contained in the legislation. And you heard some of it from your other panelists. Mm-hmm. But one of the first and foremost thing is to declare publicly so that it is seen by your employees as well as any subcontractors that may work for your company, the policy on sexual harassment. And basically it's saying that even though the words are different for each company, it's going to be saying that sexual harassment is not tolerated by the company. And any breaches of that will be dealt with, in the way that most disciplinary procedures are dealt with in companies, except that this sexual harassment has its own tribunal, has its own different ministry from Ministry of Labor. But in theory, the process to handle these kinds of grievances is quite similar to other grievances in the workplace, such as, performance workplace discipline and breaking of the codes of conduct. But if you're looking at the customers of our members, one of the more important things is, of course, the awareness of the policy, like I said. And what we're helping them to do is try to advise them if someone feels like they've been getting unwanted sexual advances, etc., to follow a process to take it and file your grievance with HR department. And if there's none, the head of the company, if there's none, you may have to go straight to the tribunal or to the Bureau of Gender Affairs. One of the differences I've noticed with this legislation is that a key part of the whole resolution process in the other kinds of workplace discipline is the Ministry of Labor. Yes. But I didn't see in this legislation that there would be a requirement to go to the Ministry of Culture to seek resolution before you go to the tribunal, which is the way the other labor disputes work. So, for example, only the Ministry of Labor can refer something to the tribunal. The employee can't take it straight to the tribunal. So that's a difference between the sexual harassment legislation and the other labor legislation. So, but anyway, to get back to your point, the key thing is the awareness by customers, by employees, by subcontractors of what the policy is, and to give some kind of statement as to, that the company will deal with breaches of the sexual harassment legislation.
Yes.
So, those are some of the highlights, both for the employees as well as customers, etc.
Just to pick up on something that Mr. Wan said, this is directed to you now, Mrs. Robinson. He made note around the tribunal, and while I may have my own thoughts around why that provision is there, can you clarify why you think the legislation perhaps would have been written a little bit differently in terms of the accessibility of the tribunal to individuals in such a manner?
Thank you very much, Mikhail. So I'm happy I heard Mr. Wan point that out, because I don't think many persons know this. But for this particular legislation that we had an earlier legislation, and that one was it got to the point of the lower house, and it was approved at the lower house, and that was set for the upper house, and the election trounced it. Under that first bit of legislation, the IDT, there was a recommendation that a special division of the IDT would hear the cases, and that is where the adjudication would take place. And so we were set for that to happen. But unfortunately, we received, by the time the election happened, and we now are in a new ministry, the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport, a letter was written from the Ministry of Labor and Social Security to indicate that the tribunal, the IDT, Industrial Dispute Tribunal, will not be able to take on the cases of sexual harassment because of the fact that the IDT was overburdened. And so a recommendation was made that we seek a creature that would enable us to have those cases heard, but it would not be falling under any special division of the IDT. And that's the reason we had to look for another option instead of having those cases go to court and having those persons wait out. Because as you know, a lot of cases go to court, and persons have complained about having long delays, lengthy delays. And so in order not to have it being frustrated and persons, it takes a while for it to happen, based on how grievous sexual harassment is, we felt that we needed a mechanism that was swift, that would allow for the persons, once they have a complaint, to get swift redress and for it to not be languishing in a court. And so that's the reason we had to come up with another idea of having a special court. That also was a recommendation prior to now. I must back up a little bit to say, before the legislation saw the light of day, we had a anti-sexual harassment policy. And that anti-sexual harassment policy, or anti-sexual harassment policy, was developed in the Bureau of Gender Affairs in collaboration with and in consultation with a number of key stakeholders, including the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, because sexual harassment is a workplace matter, a workplace issue. And so having those consultations, the discussions around it, recommended that we could have an ad hoc tribunal as an adjudicating body. And depending on the number of cases that would come forward, we could decide whether it is an ad hoc, where as the case comes up, they just meet, or a permanent housed body that would try the cases. But in the absence of that, the IDT was the first choice.
Mm-hmm.
So having this tribunal means that it's the first time this is happening. And so we had to consult with the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. So we have had extensive consultations and discussions around how it is that this will work. So we are not doing it in a silo approached manner. We are doing it in consultation with. And so when the case is, if there's no HR, for example, and the person goes to the head, if it is the head who is the perpetrator, because in some cases it's that person who should be the one to ensure that nobody gets harassed and should be the one to prepare with, in consultation with the members of the team, a statement or a workplace policy that states the position of this workplace in terms of how the legislation is set out. Right. If that is a person, then that will have to go directly to the tribunal, or it could come through the Bureau of Gender Affairs, because we have a unit that's set up for that. So that unit was designed to bridge the gap between the spaces that are covered by the Act and the tribunal itself.
Wow. Okay. So thank you so much for that explanation. We appreciate that little nugget of why the tribunal works differently, and we can understand, particularly in such a sensitive issue, whereas a general workplace dispute may not be as sensitive as a sexual harassment dispute. So we can understand that. So I think we will ask everyone to give their final words now, before we take our last break. So we'll start with you, Mr. Wan. Any final comments on the Act and on what corporations and companies should be doing?
Yeah, just want to say it's been a while in coming. We've had lots of notice. And in theory, we still have another year before it's fully turned on legally. And I think it's a step in the right direction. I think it's a good thing for the workplace, because we don't want any kind of harassment, discrimination of any kind, whether it's sexual, ethnic or racial, things like that. So this completes a broad spectrum of what we've had in the workplace before. So now we're happy to see it. As we mentioned in the early part of this program, this is limited to workplace, institutions, schools, hospitals, and landlord-tenant situations, but does not cover out in the public, like in Halfway Tree Square. There's nothing yet to cover harassment of this nature. So I'm hoping later on down the line, they will then move to have some sort of legislation to cover general out in the public spaces harassment. So we are pleased that this thing is coming to fruition, and we look forward to having a much improved workplace because of this.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wan. To you, Mrs. or Miss Steele, rather. I don't want to marry you off.
No problem. Yes, we certainly are appreciative of this act. And as Dr. or Mr. Wan said, the legislation later needs to cover the wider public. We are happy that it is covering what happens in the workplace, and workplace meaning wherever you have to work, be it household helpers or general offices and that kind of thing. We will have to, in terms of our respective organizations, I think, to ensure that we have persons within our organization adhering to all these rules and regulations. And I'm also happy that although the act is in the operation stage, that there is facility in place should there be any kind of report to deal with the situation. We at SBJ certainly have or have taken a no-nonsense approach to sexual harassment, and we will continue to embark on that.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Robinson?
Thank you so much. So, I'm very encouraged by what I heard from Mr. Wan and Ms. Steele. And I just wanted to say that we are very happy about the fact that there is such receptivity, and we look forward certainly to the compliance. I think I'll just use my next minute to read the definition, if I may, Michael and Jade.
Sure.
Because for persons, I just want them to get the full gamut of what it constitutes. So I'm reading straight from the legislation. Sexual harassment means the making of any unwelcome sexual advance towards a person by another person, which A, is regarded as offensive or humiliating by the person towards whom the sexual advance is made, or has the effect of 1, interfering with the work performance of the person to whom the sexual advance is made, or creating an intimidating, offensive, or hostile work environment. So I think this captures pretty much most of what we would want. I heard Mr. Wan talk about the fact that it doesn't cover street harassment. We are aware of that, and I can tell you extensive discussions took place at the Joint Select to have that done.
Yes, because we had made that recommendation in another from another place when Jade and I, we were with Jamaica Aid Support for Life at the time.
Yes,
that's correct. The comfort in that, Michael and Mr. Wan and Jade, is that we have agreed that we're going to speed up the process of review. So normally it's 4 to 5 years. Yes. We're shortening that to say perhaps 3 years, so that we can cater to these kinds of other parts, the gaps that are there in terms of the street harassment. And perhaps some persons are also talking about cyber harassment as something we could consider. So we are thinking if we go to a swift review, let us say within the first 3 years of the operation of this particular legislation, that might allow us to be able to bring those in, the parts that we don't yet have. But I think based on what we have now, if we are in compliance with it and everybody understands the importance of just making sure that we respect personhood, property, and possession, we should be able to have gender harmonious workspaces. Yes. Thank you.
And may I add before you all leave, I'm happy Mr. Wan made the comment, but just to indicate or a little proposal to the Bureau that you are strategically placed within the Ministry of Gender, Entertainment, Sports and Culture. I don't think I got the order correctly, but the point here is that when it comes to entertainment, sports, and culture, there is an opportunity through other state agencies, the JCDC, where you use the art and the culture, the street theater concept to really bring the concept of ending harassment as a first step within the communities to say, this is not tolerated. This is the approach that you can take if you find someone attractive or not. So I really hope that integration within that one ministry is, can be utilized. That is what I would recommend to the Bureau. So while we wait on legislative review, certainly I think the public education could assist us in changing our cultural norms.
Okay, great. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And we are going to go into our final segment of the show now.
Have a good day to our guests. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for having us, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. Producer, take the break or we can just continue up. All right.
Yes.
So
we wanted to have a discussion around the amendments that are likely will be discussed in another 12 or so minutes.
Well, not likely. It's actually on the agenda.
Yes.
For Parliament today.
Yes.
To not only discuss, but to actually take the bill.
Right. Which we would have said at the beginning of the show that we have some concerns with the draft that was produced. And we would have said that while we acknowledge the repeal of Section 24, which is something that we've championed in our advocacy for many years, what we are seeing as the proposed amendment kind of.
But before you even get into that, Jay, let me just ask you. Let us switch the roles. I'll play the interviewer, and you just answer some questions because I really want people to get it.
Yes.
What are the current provisions within the Child Care and Protection Act that is provided for under Section 24?
Well, that section would allow, as it is now, a parent a parent to bring a child before the court if it is that the parent is unable to control the child. When they bring the child before the court now, the court may make several orders, which would include making a correctional order and placing the child in a juvenile correctional facility for an undetermined period according to the Act itself.
Up to 18 years old, a child
yes.
Who has normal behavioral.
But even abnormal, the child would have committed no offense, right?
So just what you call status offenses.
Yes.
So if I'm an adult, so if I were to have any display of frustration or so on, I'm quite fine. But if a child were to display that child could be deemed as uncontrollable.
Yes, and I'll give you even a practical example of a report that I would have gotten in my experience as an attorney. Parent brought the child before the court because the child entered into a relationship that the parent did not approve of, which would have made the child leave the household at times that the parent would not approve of. No, this child was a teenager. And as a person who went through teenage years, this seemed like normal teenage behavior. And because the parent could not talk the child out of the relationship or these activities, brought the child before the court. At the point when we were getting the report, the parent is unable to vary a court order, and the child would have been in a juvenile correctional facility for 2 years at that point.
And let us never forget Vanessa Wint.
Yes.
A child who was sexually molested by her uncle, I believe. She ran away from home several times, placed in a juvenile detention facility. As a result, no therapeutic intervention whatsoever. She went back home, I believe, ran away again, placed back in the system again. She committed suicide at age 16. So I just wanted to put that situation so we understand that sometimes we label children as bad and so on, not recognizing that one is normal behavior in some instances. Children get upset.
Yes.
And they show frustration in a way that requires more conversational engagement, disciplinary measures that don't involve beating.
Yes.
So as parents, we need some support. But in a lot of the instances, children who are deemed uncontrollable, when you look at the circumstances, like a Vanessa Wint, sexual abuse and assault, and some other trauma. And the Act never defined what uncontrollable was.
Yes.
So this amendment, Jade, seeks to define uncontrollable by substituting it with the word behavioral challenges. And what do they call behavioral challenge?
So many different activities that could, for example, hyperactivity could be a behavioral challenge.
So my little baby now running up and down if he were here. Normal behavior.
Yes,
2-year-old.
I have to also consider the fact that we have, especially in the Black community, and Jamaica is a majority Black population, an underdiagnosis of issues like ADHD, which might affect a child's hyperactivity or a child's ability to follow instruction, which is also one of the tenets under behavior. So displeasure of the parents is one of the behavioral challenges. Truancy is one of the behavioral challenges.
Read the one I wrote, irritability. That one got me and disruptive behavior.
Yes, there was that irritability and disruptive behavior.
Those are the minor ones. But focus now on the ones that one would think requires more psychiatric intervention.
Yes, so for example, suicidal ideation is one of the which means that the child is at risk of committing suicide. That is one of the behavioral challenges. If the child consumes alcohol at any point, that is one of the behavioral challenges. They speak to associating with any individual or group involved in bullying. So the child themselves does not have to do the bullying based on that wording. Just their association might be something that deems them uncontrolled. Inability to regulate emotions is something that might deem a child uncontrollable. So
for those who are listening in, Jade,
yes,
and saying that at the end of the day, perhaps what the proposal is trying to do, when you look at the lovely building that we saw being opened with that therapeutic center, what exactly is JFJ's concern?
Honestly, number one, there is several provisions under the Act. Like under the behavioral challenges, some of the issues are criminal. Those children will not be sent to the therapeutic centers. Those children will be sent to a probation officer or an aftercare officer, which is a completely different mechanism. And then when we talk about the therapeutic centers, they act as the amendment has no specifications as to what makes up this therapeutic center. So is it that we have specific professionals there? What are those professionals?
And the question is, even if it had all of those niceties,
yes,
if a child has what is normal childhood behavior,
yes,
and even in instances wherein clearly suicidal ideation is a serious matter that must be dealt with, my question is institutionalization the best approach, or in keeping with international standards, should that be seen as the measure of last resort?
Yes, and JFJ's position has been to not include this provision at all. No substitution, no reimagining of it, just to not have it, because this
just fully repeal Section 24.
Absolutely, because this is not an issue that necessarily needs to be legislated in this way. If we are going to legislate it, maybe we should be looking more towards the protection of children, and therefore most of the obligations would be on the parents rather than the child. But this child focus on the
perfect child, which doesn't exist.
Yes. It is.
And while the therapeutic center theoretically is a good concept, because we have been asking for institutions such as those to be developed by the state, the challenge that we're having, again, the broad category of behavioral challenges,
yes,
without clear guidelines in terms of on what basis will that child be placed, and should a child automatically be placed if it is that they're having a normal range of childhood behaviors and
but
so
even
on.
the fact that the first instance that the child is brought before the court in terms of these behavioral issues, it's not that the child is first brought to the psychiatrist or psychologist and an evaluation
or the children's
is done.
officer within the Child Protection and Family Services Agency.
Yes, so none of those non-judicial avenues are utilized.
The child, the intimidatory approach of the court.
Exactly. And then the child is now subject to a court order, which is different than the child voluntarily being enrolled into some sort of therapeutic treatment. So we have to look at all of those implications as well. And there are implications for if the child does not comply with the court order, which means not going to the therapeutic center or not engaging in
and
the
there's
treatment.
Absence of language. So, for example, I think there was a particular proposal within the amendment that says if the child does not adhere, then the parent must report to the court.
Yes.
And I remember writing on my notes, and what?
Yes, exactly.
It was unclear. But what is problematic for me is that though there's a substitution of language, I still don't get a sense that there's a clear prohibition that prevents a child who has committed no offense from ever being placed in a juvenile detention facility. So I am fearful that it's a rewording, and while it's a step in the right direction, it needs fine-tuning and it needs intervention in terms of legislative framing for us to be assured that what is currently happening, the injustice to our children won't continue.
Absolutely.
So we did write an open letter,
yes,
several civil society organizations, as we wrap up in another minute, urging Minister Favour Williams to reconsider. Apparently, it is set to be passed to the House today, and I'm hoping that that open letter will have the members of the House reconsider based on the questions and the clarifications that we have raised and the concerns that we have put forward, not only with JFJ, but also several other civil society partner agencies, E4Life, Equality for All Foundation, Jamaica Youth Advocacy Network, and other individuals such as Dr. Peter and Baker, and so on. So let's see what happens.
Yes. So thank you so much for joining us. We did not get a winner to our trivia question as yet. If you respond to the question via Instagram, the first person who gives us the correct answer will be messaged as the winner. So thank you so much for joining us this week. You can join us again next week at the same time, 1 p.m. I am Jade Williams.
And I'm Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ. Thank you. See you next week.
Justice, the people's champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under law. Justice, Jamaica the Lord. Right to life, right to liberty. Out of many we are one in a Jamaica. Make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities. No to unlawful detention and police brutalization. Class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination.
To join the fight against injustice, contact us at 755-4524 or JamaicансForJustice.org.
The people's champion.
This is Romain Berger and you're locked into the Bridge 99 FM. Your Caribbean vibes amplified. Easy.
Oh, come, you and me, let's break free from these mental chains.
Yes, every Thursday, come, let's untangle.
Free up the fear.